I'm back out in the garage today working again on this 911 engine. Wasn't able to start it last week. A few people, including the mechanic who had this prior to me, he asked me to make sure the grounds are attached up here on the intake manifold, so I had them direct to the battery. And also, he asked me to open up the ECU or the DME and make sure there was actually a chip installed, which there was. So now I'm on to some of the other suggestions, which are to measure the pulse signal on the coil and also measure the signals all the way at the DME for things like the crank position and crank speed sensor. So let's get going.
Garage time.
I'm also grounding with a wire right to the manifold to the ECU. This was grounded last week too, but I just want to make sure there's nothing ungrounded. This normally gets bolted to the car, so you would consider it grounded at least to the case. Okay, so the fuel pump is grounded, the engine's grounded to the battery with a huge strap. Everything in terms of grounding should be good. This is an altitude sensor, it's not critical right now. Also new this week is a replacement DME relay. This is the old one that I think is working okay, but this came from URO. This was brand new, and this obviously should work better. I was getting a really subtle sound out of this one. When it clicks, it's really faint. So the DME goes right into this connector right here. So see if we can plug that in. That's it. And then this does not ground anything. That's just a plastic clip to secure it. Also, I have a new battery because last time the battery was acting really weak, so I had to use the jumper on it, and so this time I just have a fresh battery. Okay, now when I turn the ignition on, this is the equivalent to turning the key to the run position. When I do that, I can feel the relay inside moving. There's actually two relays inside, one's for the fuel pump, but the fuel pump doesn't turn on until it starts cranking. But I can feel something moving in there. It's not noticeably different than the previous one. I've turned the lights off because I'm having a hard time seeing the spark. So let's try, see if we have any spark. No spark. Fuel pump is turning on though, which means this ECU is getting some signal, but we still need to diagnose why there's no spark. Now I'm going to put the scope onto the coil like many of you suggested and look to see if there's an output signal from the ECU to fire the coil. And it's a complete flat line. It's actually measuring 0 volts, but that's 0 volts across the coil. Okay, now I'm measuring the signal here on the negative side of the coil to ground, and it's just showing 12 volts on this side. When I crank it, it drops to like 11, but there's no signal whatsoever to actually trigger or cause the coil to fire. Unfortunately, that eliminates all the easy stuff. So it's not something like a low battery or the DME relay. It's either something to do with the wire harness, my connections to it, or it has to do with the ECU itself. Now, the guy that the engine came from swears that this ECU is rebuilt. It's been sitting on a shelf for a while, but it was freshly rebuilt, fully rebuilt in 2019, I think. So it's unlikely it's the ECU, but I'm going to start probing on the back of the ECU and look for the signals all the way to the ECU. So if there's a problem with the harness, maybe that'll help me discover that. Okay, this is a little tricky, but this is the connector that comes right off the ECU here. And this back is removable, so let's see if we can get access to the wiring as it's plugged in. I did look into these connections. These are, if for a California car, you ground that, and it has something to do with less emissions. So, but most people recommend you unplug that. It's only for California. And it's likely someone's had this off before because it looks like it's missing a zip tie, and this is not fully covered. I have not had this off before. So it looks like it looks like you can slide it. So it doesn't, it just slides off. And then, like I thought, back here are the pins. So let's make sure we don't lose anything. This little insert slides out, and I think that's what unlocks the pin. So we don't want to take any pins out. This is the way it goes. I have to push a little bit here. None of the pins look like they popped out, so that's good. You can see the backs of the pins. I have the pinouts here for everything. It tells me exactly what is what. Pins 35 and 18 are these right here. This is what provides power to the ECU. And when the ignition's switched on, they both have power. They both have 12.8 volts. So I'm going to crank the engine and see how much it drops, just so we know the ECU has enough power to do its thing. Okay, 11.3 on that pin. 11.2. Now I measured the speed sensor at the engine connector, but now I'm going to measure it right here at the ECU as it's plugged in. Okay, I've connected my probe to the back of pins 27 and 8. This is, according to the diagram, the speed sensor. And I just have some welding wire going into the back of the pins. The connector is insulated, and this is just attached like that, so these happen to stay in place. So now I need to crank it and watch for the signal here on the screen. So I'm getting plus minus 5 volts on the speed sensor, and that appears to be working correctly. So that checks out. Let's move on to the position sensor. Okay, I think that is 25, 26. So let's look at those. It looks right. It just looked different last time. I think because of the trigger, it's actually locking it in position, which is even better. But let me move this out of the way and see if it'll flash across the screen again. Okay, now I'm measuring pin 1, which is the signal to the coil. And it's grounded, and pin 1 is showing plus 12 volts. So if I switch off the ignition, there's nothing on pin 1. When I switch it on, it does go to, that is 12 volts right there. So let's crank it and see if there's a signal here. No. It just drops down in voltage like 1 volt, but that's not enough to prevent it from starting, and there's no signal to the coil, which this is why there's no spark. So here, it's getting a little tricky now. All signs are pointing to something wrong in the ECU. You know, I have another ECU, belongs to my own engine. I'm a little leery to replace it because whatever's damaging the ECU, you don't want it to damage the second one. So I think what I'm going to try next is I'm going to replace the harness first and see if that somehow is the factor. You know, harnesses are a little bit more robust than the ECU. So I'm going to do that, and stay tuned. This is the harness that came with the engine. A few things I've labeled on it. And then this is the new harness right here. This is from a little bit newer car, but it's exactly the same. So I don't see any problems with this one. Now this one, if you'll notice, this one doesn't have as much tape on it. This one looks a little bit more original to me. This is the older harness, and you can see it's got a lot of this tape on here. This doesn't really look factory to me. So I'm now wondering if this is maybe part of the problem. So we'll soon see. I'm Just going to take the relay out of this one and put it in another one. Fingers crossed. No spark. There's just no signal coming out of the ECU. So I guess I'm just going to swap the ECU. This is the one from Shane's car. Something is very different. I just swapped the connectors on this again, and the thing I'm noticing now, as soon as I turn the ignition on, I can hear the idle control valve, or maybe it's the airflow something or other on the manifold there. I can hear something humming, which is probably a good sign. I think it's probably trying to control something. So that's good. And I actually just got a signal on the negative side of the coil on the oscilloscope. Let me show you. Okay, that's the key on. So there's the 12 volts. I hit start. And there's the signal on there, and I'm definitely getting a spark. Things are looking promising. I'm gonna put the spark plug back in, connect this to number 1, turn on the fuel pump, and see if it'll start. Yep, we got fuel flow. Okay, a little bit of starting fluid now. There we go. So now it seems to be a fuel issue. So I'm going to check on the fuel injectors. I'm going to check for the electric pulse that's turning those injectors on. You know, this engine's been sitting a long time. It's very possible the injectors are dirty. Okay, I forgot to connect this right here. This is the fuel injector power and signal. So now that that's plugged in, let me check for signal again. Should be in better shape. Yeah, there's a signal and it's actually ready to go. So let's take this off, plug this back in. A little more spray. Well, it's running, just not very well. Just gotta make sure all these wires are clear of the exhaust. A little smoky on this side. Just a little residual coming off of the heat exchanger on this side. I'm gonna attach a fuel pressure gauge here to this port on the fuel rail. But it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this. The fuel's coming out clean. The bottom of this has got like a little bit of sediment in it. Not bad. And then the bottom of this looks pretty clear. It's not super bad. I forgot to hit record, but I just hit start and it ran, and there's really no fuel leaks. I was trying to make sure there's no fuel leaks here. It's right above the spark plug, so didn't want anything bad to happen. But it ran for a few minutes, or it ran for a few seconds and turned itself off. I'm just trying to read these numbers here. So I'm going to use the bar scale. So these are in bars. I think that's what the manual has anyways. So it's holding residual pressure at about This is three 2.2 bars. And I'm gonna go ahead and crank it again, see what the pressure is. Forgot to turn the fuel on. So while cranking, it's getting up to 2.3 bars, 2.4 bars, and then it holds that pressure for a little bit. Okay, the internet says the fuel pressure should be 2.5, 37 PSI, so I was pretty close to that. I think it drops a little bit with some vacuum signal, but there's not enough vacuum right now in the engine. It's not really running well enough. But the fuel pressure is not the issue. I think it's close enough for now. So I'm gonna pull the injectors and see if they're probably clogged. Just wanted to show you the condition of this real quick so you can see how it's just kind of corroded. A little bit of sediment in there. So I have a feeling we're gonna see some clogged injectors. Some of them have come apart differently. So this one has this plastic cap. So plastic cap, O-ring, and then a plastic washer. That seems to be the pattern. And these don't look horribly bad. Then the other parts are just laying down inside the holes there. I'm gonna use the actual injector to try to get this O-ring out. Just wiggle it a little bit. Nope, doesn't want to come apart. There we go. See if the cap will come off now. Okay, good. There we go. Just cleaning that corrosion off this thread on the inside. And then I've already sprayed some brake cleaner in here, but I'll put it in the ultrasonic cleaner too and just clean it from the inside out. Same with the injectors. Make sure this is clean. Okay, the entire thing doesn't fit in the ultrasonic cleaner, but I'm just gonna have to rotate it a few times. Put the holes pointed up so we get some fluid inside there and hopefully gets a little cleaner. You can see the dirt coming off right there. That's probably from the outside though. And while that's cleaning, I have this electrical tester that is connected to the 12-volt battery. So I think I can put it onto one of these leads. Put it onto this lead right there and then hit it. No, this one doesn't. I can hear this switch clicking. You can typically feel it. Like the other one, I could feel it clicking. This one is dead. It's just like a little relay inside. Yeah, this one's opening and closing. I can hear it. But just because it's clicking doesn't mean fuel is flowing through. It could be completely clogged up in the passages and nothing comes through. Yeah, I went ahead and put the injectors, at least the three that are out, I just submerged the whole thing in the ultrasonic cleaner. Periodically, I'm just pulsing them. So I'm just giving it a couple cycles, opening, closing, so I can hold this down, kind of using my foot here. And you can see it come right out the other side. It was able to clean and check, roughly that these are at least flowing and clicking with some carb cleaner after the ultrasonic cleaner. So 5 of these are working, 1 of them is still dead. So I did take another one out of my engine. This one's working, so I have 6 to reinstall. Let's put them in. Just cleaning off a little bit of the carbon that's built up inside these bores here. Just want a good seal. Okay, that side's ready. Okay, here we go. That's vibrating. Yeah! It's running great! Awesome! Fuel pressure is at like 2.1. Awesome. Yes! It's about 120 degrees on the oil. Starting to heat up the tank. Oil cooler's at 95. The thermostat may not have opened yet. So good. Here's a restart.